This is my favorite drawing from a legendary Chinese artist, Illumi999. It's insanely detailed, flowy, and just chaos everywhere, so I decided to start from scratch and begin my investigations from her less complicated drawings, breaking down her iconic style into 3 components that includes composition techniques, colors, and her interesting rendering habits. Hopefully by the end of this video, I will have gathered enough clues to recreate this majestic piece of art. Let's go. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for creatives and entrepreneurs, but more on that later. Now, from a quick glance of this PureRef board that I set up here, I can see that Illumi has a few go-tos when it comes to composition, with some oddballs here and there. There's the super flowy type, usually using a single type of leading line. It can be a circular motion as well, then she just stacks the same motif again and again everywhere, just like in the final boss I'm going to conquer at the end of this video. If you look closely, you can see there are multiple of these circles lying around, all framing the character's face. Even the hair here is forming circles, which is kind of cool. We'll get into more detail about this later, but let's talk about composition techniques. And here you can see an example of Illumi's work. Massive dark tree in the middle leading straight down to the subject. The white leaves are angled downwards to support that same motion, leading the eye to this spot where the character is with the cozy bonfire. This is what we call leading lines, which are basically lines created by positioning or arranging objects in the scene to direct attention. The values are also set up to support this composition idea, where the darkest value is on the main tree and the rest of the trees are not as dark because they're not the ones leading to the subject. This is a pretty simple setup, similarly to this piece with a 3-layered setup. We got the foreground, middle ground, where the characters are, and the background sky. Pretty basic. The special thing that Illumi did here is the sky. See how the gaps between the clouds are arranged in a way that crosses the body of the characters like this? The bright green in the sky are only present right around the characters and not around the edges of the canvas, maximizing all the focus towards where the characters are. The foreground grass are also intentionally pointed slightly towards the character like this, reinforcing the whole idea. So far, I have ignored the elephant in the room by only giving examples that involves nature. With man-made structures, this is even easier to achieve because you get these free straight lines everywhere. No matter what number perspective you're using, you can always find excuses to draw free leading lines towards your subject, just like what Illumi is doing here. And once you know what to look for, you will see this technique being repeated everywhere, especially in these indoor type scenes. But just using leading lines are sometimes not enough. There's another powerful technique Illumi uses to capture the eyes of thousands. But before that, let me tell you more about Squarespace. If you are a serious artist and want to have a professional looking website ready in minutes to showcase your beautiful art, then Squarespace is the only website builder you ever need. With the latest Blueprint AI technology, even a noob like me can build a stunning portfolio with zero experience. There are tons of templates and easy drag and drop tools available for you to build your website with ease. These things are so intuitive, you might as well be brain dead. If you're an artist looking to sell products, then Squarespace has got you covered on all fronts, including built-in store pages and secure checkout options, as well as super advanced SEO tools and analytics. Literally the whole package. But if you're not convinced yet, don't worry. They even let you try it out for free for 14 days. You can take your sweet time to build something cool, and when you're ready, use my link in the description or code RICEBRUSH to get 10% off your first website or domain. Thank you Squarespace for sponsoring the video. You see, Illumi's way of drawing faces is always low contrast, soft, and with these long, elegant lines. Although I'm personally a huge fan of this look, this actually poses a huge problem because now the focal point no longer focal points. So to fix this, Illumi reintroduces some of that contrast through a second way called framing. And if leading lines are like arrows shot by a seasoned hunter straight through the prey, then this is like setting up traps in various locations for the poor rabbit to eventually fall into. Okay, that was a weird analogy. I will get into more detail later on about this piece when we talk about colors, but just real quick, let's focus on how Illumi uses framing here. There's that same problem we talked about. See how the face itself isn't super high contrast, therefore we register it as the same object as the entire body. Frames such as this big orange donut here literally highlights the area the artist wants you to look at. As per usual, if it's a scene with a man-made structure, it's basically free framing as well. These frames can be any shape from from windows, doors, arches, this mirror, anything. But these are obvious, right? What's crazy is that you can actually combine the two techniques together. Here, I'll give you 3 seconds to spot the frame here. Alright, if your answer is the extremely saturated blue all around the character, you are half right. These little saturated ornaments conveniently placed around her head while having complementary colors to the blue background makes a circle frame around her face. And yes, even the position of these two masks on her collar are perfectly calculated, plus that hand gesture that just so happened to fall in line with the rest of them. And this is a technique that combines both leading lines and framing. It's not that hard to pull off once you understand the principles. And of course, this technique is also used in the final boss. The triangle formed between these 3 larger items, the swirling ribbons creating the stacked circular frames, and the flower petals everywhere as well. And this ties directly into the next topic, colors. Just like 96 Yatea, Illumi is not shy when it comes to using bold and saturated colors. Check out my video on 96 here if you haven't already. The piece I wanted to recreate has these very intense colors as well, but they use it very strategically in the composition. For starters, Illumi seems to mainly only use 2 main colors at a time. It's very rare that she'll break this rule, but yeah, she did break it with the final boss piece, so we have some work to do here. The proportion of the colors used are always something along these lines. You just have to remember whatever is in the minority tends to stand out in the piece, and they should always be the opposite of what the majority is. This means they can either be complementary hues or have a very big difference in saturation. Let's look at some examples. If I turn on the mosaic filter here, you can see most of the colors in the middle here are just variations of the same color. These make up around 80% of the total area covered. The other 2 colors that Illumi uses are the pink over here, which is around 10%, and then we have this intense yellow here that covers the remaining 10%. They're all quite saturated, especially the yellow and the pink, and you'll see this happen a lot in other pieces by Illumi. The minority and the majority colors are usually opposites in terms of saturation. In this case, the 80% is made up by fairly unsaturated colors, but the opposite can also happen, like this one here. Her skin and clothing are colored by this intense orange, and the rest of the piece is this flat gray with a slight orange tint, and the hair, which is just desaturated like almost black. This time the saturated parts are the majority. Knowing these color tricks, Illumi cleverly used them as part of the composition to help guide the eye even more, on top of the compositional tricks she's already using. And here's how you know Illumi is an expert at what she does, because even in this triad color palette used, the saturation levels of each of the 3 hues varies, creating a hierarchy between the colors. The orange used on the main subject has the most saturation, followed by the blue in the sky to balance things out. Then finally the subtle pink as a supporting cast. The fading saturation from top to bottom also pulls our attention towards the face, along with a sprinkle of other random hues in very controlled amounts to add in that extra punch. And while most of us will have already fumbled when using this many colors, Illumi doesn't just stop there. No, the very saturated reds and greens sprinkled around the character just makes the piece a lot more colorful and dynamic in a tasteful way. These hues are mostly for framing, just like we discussed earlier if you were paying any attention, with the greens forming a square formation like this and the reds running across the character like this. If you know, you know, because balancing multiple colors like this is really hard. A slight off balance will just kill the entire piece. And if we look back at the final boss, of course, this is perfectly executed. Multiple hues sprinkled in, but instead of a triad color scheme we've seen in the last piece, it's an analogous color scheme that uses neighboring hues. And once we have the foundation set up with composition and colors, it's time to explore some of Illumi's peculiar rendering habits. First off, as we all know, she loves details, like a metric ton of them. You don't need me to tell you this, just take a look at how crazy the amount of details there are there. I assume that not all of these are drawn by hand because that would just take an insane amount of work. I really want to believe that these are done using the help of 3D models or stamp brushes. please. The second thing that she does is the low contrast facial features like we talked about, except there's a catch here. Illumi likes to color her lines, and you guys probably know how important this step is for an anime style drawing. Here you want to use the multiply layer and adjust the opacity according to your liking, or you can lock the opacity and paint over the lines manually. If you look closely into this piece, the light and shadow layerings are not that complicated. It's mostly cell shaded with some light gradients going across the whole thing. Very typical anime style stuff. I do want to note that Illumi usually keeps her lines pretty sketchy as well. A lot of the rougher lines you see in the beginning are actually kept in the final. This I think contrasts really well with the super well rendered ornaments and patterns and balances everything out. There also tends to be a lot of layering of items, things overlapping each other as they create this confusing web of stuff. So be prepared to use a lot of layers. Keep in mind that as a layer is positioned further back, meaning away from the camera, they tend to get blurred and faded out like this to create that sense of distance. Some other random techniques to keep the background elements low contrast include avoid using any lines, use big swooping shapes with minimal shading, and heavy use of gradients to fade them out. And with all of that information, it's time for me to start working on the final boss. I did a quick sketch here planning out where I want to put all my items with thin and minimal lines. I also traced the original piece very roughly here to really understand how Illumi plays her circles and her focal points. Here I really want to plan out the illustration and keep my lines as clean as possible, like planning out the color placements in the future and position them in a way that will frame the character well. You'll see later. My brain is too smooth for managing anything more than 20 layers, so I try to pack things into the same layer as much as possible. But if you're good at managing layers, you should definitely keep things separate. Keeping a bright background here, just like the original piece, I tried to come up with different color schemes because the character I wanted to draw is different from what the original piece had, and also all the items are different as well. So I didn't want to just copy the piece, but actually applying what I learned to my own work. For the rendering, most of these food items are rendered by hand, painstakingly, but to increase the amount of details, I actually went to the Clip Studio asset store and found some pretty nice pattern brushes to use everywhere. They're all from the same user, by the way. I'll just link it in the description. Sorry if you're not using Clip Studio. And yeah, you can see how I layered everything when it comes to composition. We got the 4 purple items forming a square like this, a ring of red stuff surrounding the character, and some nice leading lines created by these ribbons. I'll say my biggest struggle was the hair. I still couldn't get it done as well as Illumi, but I am pretty happy with this piece overall. Maybe it's time to do a hair study? What do you think? If you think this was helpful, then you'll find my dino study interesting too. Make sure to give it a click. Bye!